Welcome to Candidate Conversations, part of Delaware Debates 2014, produced by Delaware Public Media in collaboration with the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication. I'm Delaware Public Media News Director Tom Byrne. This conversation, taped at the WMPH studios at Mount Pleasant High School, is focusing on the race for State Attorney General. And we are joined by the Green Party candidate, Catherine Damavandi. How are you doing today?
Fine, how are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. And we started all these conversations off with the most basic question, which is, why did you decide to run for Attorney General?
Well, I've worked at the Attorney General's office for over 14 and a half years. Basically, my entire legal career, or almost all of it, was at the Attorney General's office. And I understand the challenges that are facing our state, and because I understand the office, I know how to most effectively respond to the benefit of our citizens. And that's when I decided to quit my job, because I'm required to do that by law in order to run for Attorney General.
What do you feel separates you from the other candidates who are running for this position this year?
Right. Well, the greatest difference is that none of the other candidates have any experience working at the Attorney General's office. None of them have ever tried a criminal case. And I think that's a really significant difference and distinction that, I understand what goes on in the office. It's not just a matter of being the chief law enforcement officer, which is the criminal side of that. If you look at other states will have a DA, a district attorney. Delaware doesn't have a DA. That's part of the Attorney General's office. So there's another component to that. There's the civil side. All of our state agencies, when they're represented by counsel, those attorneys work at the Attorney General's office. And we also have a fraud division and a family division. So understanding what goes on in the office is very important in terms of knowing what worked before and understanding the resources that we have in the office to most effectively move forward.
You mentioned that experience, the prosecutorial experience. How does that maybe separate you even further from those who do not have it in terms of just the practical implications of looking at cases and making decisions?
Right. Well, I worked in the misdemeanor trial unit for a period of time, and I can tell you that the criminal cases that come through, it's just a mill. I mean, when I had a court calendar in the morning, there were about 40 cases that I had to either try, plea out, or otherwise settle. And in the afternoon, I had another court calendar of another 40 cases. And I was one of several other attorneys, and that's just Newcastle County. When you go to Superior Court, when you look at the felonies there, it's nonstop. So the other candidates who are looking at this, their suggestions have either been to throw the book at the offenders or to try to talk to the judges, because perhaps our judges aren't sentencing the offenders as stringently as they should. I also served as counsel to the Department of Correction, so I understand the prison overcrowding issues that come up. I understand how costly it is to the state. And I understand the partnership between the Department of Correction and the judiciary, that they only want to incarcerate the most serious violent offenders and see if there's other resources we can use to reduce recidivism, what programs have worked, etc. So as someone who understands the criminal justice system, I know that throwing the book at people or just trying to impose stronger sentences isn't what works. We need to be proactive and not reactive. And by that I mean understand the root cause of the problem. And I think with most of our issues with crime and violence, it's because there's a criminal enterprise that has come into a neighborhood or a certain area of our state. And I think that vulnerability mostly comes from the lack of working class jobs. People need to put food on their table. For example, in Wilmington, the unemployment rate is estimated about 28%. Well, 28% of people need to bring in some source of income, and that's a great environment for organized crime to come in, offer jobs to these people, and take over the neighborhood. That's what we need to address. And my proposal to do that is to reinstate the Department of Justice's career criminal unit so that we're identifying who are the people who are bringing the crime into the neighborhood and have our most experienced and effective prosecutors be assigned to the individual offenders, track them, and that way we can get them out of our neighborhoods. At the same time, we shouldn't just rely upon that. There are other components, and that's getting those jobs that we need back in the neighborhood. Otherwise, we'll just fall back into that cycle.
I was going to say, you kind of went right where I wanted to go, which is that level of violent crime, specifically in Wilmington, which has garnered so much attention. You talked a little bit about how you can address that. Are there some other things that the Attorney General's office can do to specifically deal with that violent crime issue in the city of Wilmington?
Right. It's understanding what is the root cause of the problem. If you're arresting somebody, what is their role in the neighborhood? Are they just somebody who's lower down on the food chain, or are we talking about a kingpin? Mm-hmm. And we have a number of different crimes that we can charge people with. One of the things that I don't know that we've used as effectively are our racketeering laws, which do have minimum mandatory penalties. So that's a good way to get somebody off the street who's been doing this repetitively.
I want to talk also about the state's ability to prevent crime against vulnerable populations, such as children or the elderly. What kind of plans do you have to address those issues as Attorney General?
Right. I think we already have mechanisms in place. We have a child predator unit, and I think that should absolutely continue. With seniors, I believe that there should be more outreach, specifically with regard to fraud, because in 2012, Delaware was number 13 on the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission's list for identity theft. And now we're number 12, and that was from last year. The results came out for 2013. And in terms of fraud complaints, Delaware's number 4. So who gets targeted the most with fraud? It's seniors. When someone tries to start a fraud scandal, when you talk to a senior, they're very polite. They will listen, whereas I believe that someone who's younger will just cut them off and say not interested. The other thing about the senior population is they've saved for their retirement, so they're another reason why they're a target. And I believe we should have more outreach for that, so that we're responding to the complaints that come in, and we're also prosecuting. It's important to make sure that our resources are focused on prosecutions.
We also have heard a lot more recently about identity theft, other cyber-related crimes. What's the AG's role there, you think, in helping residents of the state combat that issue?
I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to partner up with other agencies. When I worked in the fraud division at the Attorney General's office, there were some cases that we would investigate. And the more we investigated, it would turn out it wasn't just affecting Delaware. There was one case I had, we thought maybe it was nationwide. It turned out it was international, and we called the U.S. Attorney's Office. So in terms of our resources, what Delaware will do that the federal government will not is we don't have any type of minimum threshold. For example, if a case only involves a $1,000 loss, we'll investigate that. Whereas if you go to the FBI, if it's not an aggregate amount, I believe the aggregate amount is somewhere about $200,000 or more, and it could be more than one case, but they're not going to spend their resources to look into that. So it's important that we focus on the cases that target our vulnerable population, and where we can use resources such as the federal government or some joint action with another state, we will do that.
And finally, what do you feel the Attorney General's role is in judicial reform? And perhaps more broadly, how active should the office be in crafting and advocating for policy change?
I think if you look at somebody who understands the system, they can tell you that the judiciary really cares about the people that they serve. And one example is the SENTAC Commission, and SENTAC, it's spelled SENTAC, which is short for Sentence Accountability Commission. And SENTAC, all of the crimes that we have, all of the offenses, the judiciary, the Attorney General, the Public Defender, the Delaware State Police, and the Police Chiefs Council, and some other members, have already gone through all of those offenses and said, all right, this is the guidelines. If you get convicted of theft, these are the guidelines for sentencing. This is the guideline for bail, etc., so that we're all on the same page. So to someone on the outside or someone who hasn't served in the criminal justice system, you would think that the judiciary hasn't really looked at that. But actually, the judiciary is very effective in working with the Attorney General's office and the Department of Correction in saying, we're sentencing these offenders, we're seeing them coming back, where can we be more effective? So I think that's already out there. I think it's the Attorney General. What needs to happen is to make the public more aware of what's going on so they understand what's happening when we sentence people, when we incarcerate them, and what our options are to prevent recidivism.
All right, Catherine Damavandi, Green Party candidate for Attorney General. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You can find all of our candidate conversations online at DelawarePublicMedia.org and DelawareDebates.org. This candidate conversation was taped at Mount Pleasant High School's WMPH studios and are part of Delaware Debates 2014, produced by Delaware Public Media in collaboration with the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication. I'm Delaware Public Media News Director Tom Byrne. Thanks so much for joining us.